3 days after her mother paid a man $40,000 to marry her, 32-year-old Ayanna Fields, a sweet, plus-sized woman who had spent her life searching for real love, was gone. The wedding dress she dreamed of wearing still hung in her closet. Her phone was silent. And when searchers finally found her, she was buried deep in the woods, a single bullet in her chest. What happened in those final 72 hours? And why did the man who promised to love her forever become the prime suspect in her murder? Welcome to True Crimes Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. 3 days after her mother handed a man $40,000 to marry her daughter, 32-year-old Ayanna Fields was gone. The heavy-set woman with the warmest laugh and the gentlest soul had been seen by everyone at the wedding, glowing in a way they hadn't witnessed in years. Now, her phone was silent. Her side of the bed was cold, and the man who had slid a ring on her finger was giving explanations that felt more like rehearsed lines than concern. For Denise Fields, Ayanna's mother, the deal she made just a week earlier had been born from love and desperation. She had watched her only child grow up in a world that judged her for her size before even hearing her voice. Ayana had been the girl who stayed in during high school dances, who covered her stomach in every photo, who laughed off cruel comments while swallowing the hurt. Denise had promised herself that her daughter would have a chance at happiness no matter what it cost. So when Derrick Lawson walked into their lives with his polished charm, smooth voice, and confident promises, Denise thought maybe, just maybe, this was the answer. Derrick was 35, handsome in a way that made strangers turn their heads, and quick to say all the right things. He spoke to Ayana like she was the only person in the room. He complimented her smile, asked her opinion, told her she was beautiful in ways no man ever had. And Ayana, starved for that kind of attention, drank in every word. Denise saw the spark in her daughter's eyes and ignored the nagging questions. Why was he single at his age? Why did he seem to avoid talking about his past? Why did every conversation about the future circle back to his need for a foundation before settling down? One evening, over coffee at their kitchen table, Derrick leaned in close to Denise and spoke with quiet conviction. He wanted to marry Ayana. He said it plainly, like a man sure of his decision. But then came the pause, the slight hesitation, and the words that would set everything in motion. He told her he couldn't do it yet, not until he could stand beside Ayana without feeling like a burden. He had a business idea, he said, something that could secure their future. All he needed was the capital to start, $40,000. Denise knew better than to hand over that kind of money to a man she'd just met. But she also knew the way Ayana looked at him, the way she laughed when he was around, the way she seemed to finally believe she was worthy of being loved. In Denise's mind, it wasn't just money. It was a ticket out of the loneliness her daughter had lived in for years. A week later, the money was wired. The wedding was small but beautiful, held in a rented hall with family and a few close friends. Ayana wore an ivory gown that hugged her figure, the lace sleeves covering her arms just the way she liked. She cried through her vows, clinging to Derrick's hands as though letting go would break the spell. He smiled at her in front of everyone, but his eyes wandered, watching the photographer, the guests, the exits. Tasha Green, Ayana's oldest friend, noticed it immediately. She knew her friend's heart, knew how fragile it could be, and something in Derrick's detachment made her uneasy. After the reception, Ayana told her mother she felt like the luckiest woman alive. Derrick's arm was around her, his lips brushing her temple, but when no one was looking, his expression flattened into something colder. The first night in their apartment was quiet. Ayana lit candles, poured champagne, and fussed over small details to make the evening special. Derrick drank slowly, barely talking. When she asked what was wrong, he told her he was just tired. She convinced herself it was normal. Marriage would take some adjustment. The next morning, she called her mother, her voice light and excited. They talked about dinner plans for later in the week. That was the last time Denise heard her daughter's voice. By the third day, the silence was unbearable. Calls went unanswered. Derrick told Denise that Ayana had been feeling unwell, that she just needed rest. But when Tasha texted her, the message showed as unread. When a neighbor, Leon Briggs, saw Derrick loading black trash bags into his trunk early one morning, he thought it was odd, but said nothing. Later that night, police would learn that was the morning Ayana disappeared. The search began quietly at first, just family and friends calling around. But by the evening of the third day, Denise knew something was wrong. She drove to the apartment, knocking until Derrick opened the door. He looked calm, too calm. He told her Ayana had stepped out to clear her head. He didn't know when she'd be back. When she pressed him, his answers became vague, his eyes sliding away from hers. Detectives Ryan Cole and Maria Sanchez were assigned the case the following morning. They listened carefully as Denise explained the payment, the wedding, the sudden disappearance. Cole's brow furrowed when she mentioned the $40,000. So this was before they were married? He asked. Denise nodded. It was supposed to be for their future. Sanchez's voice was softer, but carried an edge. Or his future. Derrick agreed to an interview, but gave little away. He repeated that Ayana needed space. He said they'd argued over the wedding stress, that she had taken off to stay with a friend. But when asked for the friend's name, he couldn't give one. Meanwhile, Tasha sat in her car outside the police station, scrolling through old text from Ayana, her hand shaking. She knew her friend wouldn't just vanish. Not without telling her. Not without a word. The first real break came from Leon Briggs. He called detectives after hearing the news, telling them about the trash bags in Derrick's trunk and how his clothes looked smeared with dirt. That tip shifted the investigation. Warrants were prepared. The search began, and deep in the woods, beneath a blanket of soil and leaves, the truth waited. Before sunrise, the search team gathered at the edge of the woods, their breath visible in the cool morning air. The tip from Leon Briggs had placed Derrick's car on a rural back road miles from the apartment, an area locals said hunters sometimes used but rarely anyone else.
If you're enjoying this video, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. Share and like this video. It's free and won't cost anything, but it helps and encourages us to grow and do more. Thank you for your kindness, and back to the video.
Detective Ryan Cole stood with his hands in his pockets, scanning the tree line. The ground was uneven, thick with fallen branches, and the silence felt heavy. Maria Sanchez flipped through the warrant paperwork one last time before giving the nod. They moved in with dogs leading the way, paws crunching on damp leaves. The canines pulled hard toward a narrow trail, noses low, tails rigid. Cole followed close, watching as the lead dog stopped suddenly and began to bark, pawing at the earth. The soil there looked freshly turned, darker than the surrounding ground. He exchanged a glance with Sanchez. "Here," he said quietly. Shovels came out, the scrape of metal against dirt breaking the stillness. Each scoop released a damp, earthy smell. The hole deepened, revealing something unnatural, a corner of fabric, pale against the dark soil. An officer crouched, brushing gently at the dirt until a lace sleeve emerged. Cole's stomach tightened. Sanchez's face went still. As they cleared more soil, the outline of a body became visible. It was Ayanna Fields. Her skin was cool, her hair matted with dirt and leaves. She was still in the cream blouse she'd worn days before, but it was stained with a deep, dark bloom at the chest. A single bullet wound, center mass. Around her neck, a thin chain with a small gold pendant, one her mother had given her years ago, still rested. Sanchez stepped back, letting the forensic photographer work, but her eyes didn't leave Ayana's face. "She didn't run," she murmured. Cole nodded grimly. "No, she never left on her own." Back at the staging area, Denise Fields arrived just as they were securing the site. She knew before anyone told her. One look at the officers' faces and her knees buckled. Cole caught her arm, steadying her as she shook her head over and over. "It's her, isn't it?" she whispered. No one answered, but they didn't have to. Derrick Lawson was picked up that afternoon without incident. He didn't ask why he was being arrested. He didn't even look surprised. Sitting in the interrogation room, he leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, eyes flat. Cole set a photograph of Ayana on the table, her smile radiant, her gown framing her like a dream come true. "She deserved better than this," Cole said evenly. Derrick didn't respond. Sanchez leaned forward. You took her out there. You put a bullet in her chest. You buried her like she was trash. Why? Derrick's jaw tightened. You can't prove that. But they already could. Shell casings found not far from the grave, tire tracks matching his car, and Leon's statement placing him with suspicious bags just before she vanished. Still, Derrick said nothing more, only staring past them as if the wall offered more comfort than their questions. Outside, Denise sat with Tasha, both women silent, their grief filling the hallway like a weight no one could lift. The case against Derrick Lawson grew heavier with each passing hour, and every new detail that came in only made the picture clearer. Detectives Ryan Cole and Maria Sanchez sat in the cramped evidence room, the table between them stacked with photographs, printouts, and reports. At the top of the pile was a bank statement showing the exact moment Denise Fields' account had been drained of $40,000, the transfer sliding neatly into Derrick's just 5 days before the wedding. Cole tapped the page with his finger. This is where it started. She thought she was buying her daughter's happiness. He knew he was buying himself an exit. Sanchez nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the other records. In the days following Ayana's disappearance, Derrick had made multiple ATM withdrawals, 200 here, 300 there, spread out across different locations. To anyone else, it might have looked normal, but to trained investigators, it screamed of someone trying to bleed out cash slowly so as not to set off alarms. Then came the forensics. The cream blouse Ayana had been wearing when they found her in the woods was stained deep red at the chest, and the blood pattern told its own story. The shot had been fired at close range, no more than 2 or 3 feet away. It was a kill shot, deliberate and precise, fired by someone who wanted to be certain she would never walk away. The autopsy confirmed what they already suspected. The bullet was from a .38 caliber revolver. When ballistics compared it to records, the match came back within hours. The gun was registered to Derrick Lawson. It wasn't at his apartment during the search, but that didn't matter. They knew he'd owned it, and now it was missing. Around the same time, a knock at the station door brought in Leon Briggs, the neighbor whose unease had been growing since Ayana vanished. Leon described how 2 nights after she disappeared, he'd stepped out for a cigarette and seen Derrick in the glow of a distant streetlight, standing behind his car with his trunk open. His movements were hurried, his head snapping left and right like he didn't want to be seen. Leon said Derrick was lifting something heavy, then swinging his arms like he was tossing it into the dumpster at the far end of the lot. The next morning, the dumpster was empty before anyone thought to check. Cole wrote it down anyway. He's not as clever as he thinks, he muttered to Sanchez. Sloppy cleanup leaves sloppy trails. The following afternoon, Tasha Green walked into the station, her expression caught somewhere between grief and fury. She sat in the small interview room, a box of tissues pushed toward her. She didn't cry. Instead, she told them about the last conversation she had with Ayana. It had been just after the wedding. Ayana's voice was bright, even giddy, like she was floating. She told Tasha she felt like the luckiest woman alive, that Derrick had chosen her out of everyone, that she finally believed she was worthy of being loved. But then her tone had shifted. She said Derrick wanted to take her on a drive later that week, somewhere quiet, just the two of them. She had laughed as she said it, but it was the kind of laugh that tried to cover nerves. Tasha had brushed it off at the time. Now she could hear the uncertainty in it as clear as if Ayana were in the room again. Cole leaned forward. You're saying she was nervous about going? She didn't say it outright, but yeah, I could hear it in her voice. Later, when Derrick was brought in for another round of questioning, Cole slid a copy of Tasha's statement across the table. She trusted you enough to get in that car. You took her somewhere no one could hear her scream. You put a bullet in her chest. You buried her like she didn't matter. Why? Derrick leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on a scuff mark on the wall. You can't prove that, he said after a long pause, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed him. Cole didn't bite. We can, and we will. Back at the Fields' home, Denise moved through her daughter's bedroom like she was walking through a dream she couldn't wake from. The ivory wedding gown still hung from the closet door, the lace catching in the soft afternoon light. Beneath it, the satin shoes were lined up neatly, untouched since the reception. On the dresser was Ayana's favorite perfume, the cap still on, the glass bottle reflecting tiny flecks of gold. Next to it lay her phone charger, the cord looped the way she always left it. Denise reached for the glittery pink phone case sitting beside it, the one Tasha had given Ayana last Christmas. Her fingers curled around it as if holding on tightly could somehow bring her daughter back. "You didn't deserve this, baby," she whispered into the stillness, her voice cracking. Across the city, in an office with blinds half closed against the late sun, the district attorney's team reviewed the file Cole and Sanchez had built. The photographs, the timelines, the statements, the ballistics, all of it was damning. When they called to say there was enough to charge Derrick Lawson with first-degree murder, Cole didn't smile, but there was a set determination in his jaw. He knew the trial would be brutal. He knew the defense would try to twist Ayana's story into something it wasn't. But he also knew they had the truth. And the truth was this: Ayanna Fields had wanted nothing more than love, and the man she trusted with her heart used that trust to lead her into her own grave. When the news broke that Derrick Lawson had been officially charged with first-degree murder, it spread fast. Neighbors who had once waved politely when he passed now spoke his name with disgust. At the corner store near the Fields' home, the cashier shook his head while reading the headline on his phone: "Husband arrested for bride's murder, 3 days after wedding." The weight of the case reached every corner of the community, but inside the police department, Cole and Sanchez weren't ready to slow down. An arrest was only the beginning. They needed to make the evidence airtight. The forensic team finished processing Ayana's gravesite. Soil samples on her blouse matched the dirt taken from the exact patch of ground where she was buried, and microscopic traces of tire tread rubber in the soil matched the worn edges of Derrick's sedan tires. Near the shallow grave, they also found a spent .38 shell casing partially buried under leaves. The ballistics team confirmed it was fired from the same type of revolver Derrick had registered. Even without the weapon itself, the evidence was stacking into a solid wall. In the interrogation room, Derrick kept his cool at first. He leaned back in the metal chair, arms folded, posture loose like he was watching a movie instead of facing the rest of his life. But the longer Cole went through the evidence, the more the cracks showed. He avoided eye contact when they brought up Leon Briggs' statement. His jaw flexed when they mentioned the $40,000 transfer. And when Sanchez laid down the photo of Ayana as she was found, eyes closed, skin pale, dirt clinging to her hair, he shifted in his seat and looked away. "She trusted you," Sanchez said, her voice low but steady. "Her mother trusted you. You took their money, their hope, and you ended it with a bullet." Derrick smirked, but it was thin, forced. "You think I'm the only one who's ever been given money before a wedding?" Cole leaned forward, his voice sharper now. "Plenty of men have been given money, Derrick. They didn't bury their wives in the woods 3 days later." Outside the interview room, Denise and Tasha waited. Tasha paced the hallway, arms wrapped tight across her chest, while Denise sat with her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. She had been told not to expect a confession, that most suspects in cases like this didn't admit to anything. Still, a part of her hoped he would look them in the eye and at least tell the truth about what happened. The DA's office set the preliminary hearing date. Cole and Sanchez began organizing every piece of evidence into a clear narrative. $40,000 transferred, rushed wedding, missing bride, grave in the woods, physical evidence tying Derrick to the scene. But Cole also knew that in the courtroom, facts weren't enough. The jury had to feel Ayana's presence, to understand who she was beyond the photographs of her lifeless body. That night, Cole sat in his office flipping through old family photos Denise had provided. There was Ayana as a little girl, smiling in pigtails with a birthday cake in front of her. Ayana as a teenager, holding her diploma, the pride in her eyes overshadowing the cruel comments she'd endured about her weight. Ayana at the wedding reception, cheeks flushed, tears on her lashes, her gaze fixed on Derrick as though the rest of the world had disappeared. These weren't just images, they were pieces of a life cut short. Cole closed the folder, his resolve hardening. When this went to trial, the jury wouldn't just see a victim. They would see the woman who had been taken from a mother, from a friend, from the future she believed she was finally stepping into. And Derrick Lawson would see every ounce of evidence lined up against him, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left for him to hide. The morning after Derrick Lawson's arrest, news vans crowded the street outside the police station. Reporters jostled for position, cameras aimed at the entrance as if the right angle could reveal the truth of what happened to Ayanna Fields. Inside, the detectives weren't watching the coverage. They were focused on building the chain that would lock Derrick in place with no room to slip free. Sanchez walked into Cole's office with a manila envelope. "Forensics just came back on the trunk carpet samples," she said, laying the folder down. Inside were photographs of the fibers from Derrick's sedan, side by side with fibers recovered from the clothing Ayana was found in. The match was perfect. Cole scanned the report, his jaw tightening. "So she was in his trunk," he said flatly, "at some point between her last call to her mother and the time he dumped her body." Sanchez nodded. "And get this, trace amounts of gunshot residue were found on the lining of the trunk. He didn't even bother to clean it properly." Meanwhile, Tasha had agreed to let detectives access her text history with Ayana. One of the last messages Ayana sent read, "He wants to take me to see this spot he likes. Says it's peaceful. Not sure why he's being so vague, but I'm trying not to overthink it." The timestamp was 2 days after the wedding, just hours before investigators believed she was killed. Cole slid the phone back across the table to Tasha. "This helps. It shows she didn't know what she was walking into." Tasha's eyes burned. She trusted him more than anyone. That was her mistake. At the same time, Denise was at home, dealing with the reality that every visit from the police brought her closer to hearing things she didn't want to know. She'd asked them to tell her everything, but when Sanchez stopped by with updates, Denise found herself bracing in the doorway. "We've confirmed she was transported in his trunk," Sanchez said gently. Denise gripped the frame to steady herself. "And the gun?" Sanchez hesitated, then answered, "We haven't found it yet, but we're closing in. The ballistics already match." Across town, Cole was following up with Leon Briggs again. This time, Leon mentioned something he hadn't thought important before, that when Derrick was at the dumpster that night, he saw him toss a small, dark object into a second bag before tying it up. "Could have been anything," Leon admitted, but he looked around like he didn't want anyone seeing it. Cole made a note. If they could prove Derrick had disposed of the gun, it would seal another crack in his defense. Back in the holding cell, Derrick sat on the narrow bench, staring at the floor. Every so often, he would rub his wrists where the cuffs had been, his expression unreadable. But Cole knew that look. He'd seen it on plenty of men who thought they could talk their way out of murder. Men who hadn't realized that each lie, each careless move, was just another brick in the wall closing in around them. By the time Derrick Lawson stood before a judge for his preliminary hearing, the weight of the evidence was crushing. The prosecution laid it out in a slow, deliberate sequence. The $40,000 transfer from Denise Fields' account to Derrick's just days before the wedding. The rushed ceremony followed by Ayanna's sudden disappearance. Leon Briggs' eyewitness account of Derrick loading suspicious bags into his trunk. Forensic evidence linking Ayanna's clothing to the fibers and gunshot residue found in that same trunk. The shell casing near the grave matching the type. The shell casing near the grave matching the type O. The text messages showing Ayanna's uncertainty before that final drive. Each piece alone was damning. Together, they were a noose. Denise and Tasha sat side by side in the courtroom, gripping each other's hands, their eyes fixed on the man in the defendant's chair. Derrick wore a dark suit, his hair neatly combed, but the confidence that had charmed Ayana was gone. He stared at the table in front of him as the DA described how he had lured her into the woods, shot her at close range, and buried her under leaves and soil like she was nothing. When the prosecutor displayed a wedding photo of Ayana beaming in her gown beside Derrick, the jury members leaned forward as if to memorize her face. The contrast between that joy and the crime scene photos was almost unbearable. The defense tried to argue there was no direct witness to the shooting, no murder weapon recovered. But Cole and Sanchez's meticulous work had left little room for doubt. The judge ruled there was more than enough to proceed to trial. The trial itself lasted 2 weeks. Witnesses came forward: Tasha, Leon, the forensic specialists, the financial analysts. Every one of them chipped away at the facade Derrick had built. When Derrick took the stand in his own defense, his voice was flat, his answers clipped. He claimed he had dropped Ayana near a friend's house the day she disappeared and had no idea what happened after. But under cross-examination, he couldn't explain the fibers, the residue, or why his phone pinged near the burial site at the exact time prosecutors said the murder took place. In closing arguments, the DA didn't speak about bullets or bank records. She spoke about Ayanna Fields, about a woman who had been judged for her size, overlooked, and made to feel invisible until she believed she'd finally been chosen for who she was. About a mother who spent her savings thinking she was buying her daughter's shot at happiness, not her death. And about a man who saw all that love and trust not as something to cherish, but as an opportunity to exploit. The jury deliberated for only 5 hours before returning. Guilty on all counts. Derrick Lawson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Denise cried silently as the sentence was read, her hand clutching the gold pendant Ayana had worn the day she died. Tasha closed her eyes and whispered, "She finally has justice." Outside the courthouse, Cole and Sanchez didn't celebrate. They knew justice couldn't bring Ayana back, but it could ensure Derrick would never harm another woman. And maybe, just maybe, Ayana's story would serve as a warning that love should never come with a price tag and trust should never be bought. If you followed this case with us, we want to hear from you. Do you think this tragedy could have been prevented? What's your take on the $40,000 payment Denise made? Was it an act of love or a dangerous gamble? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story.